Joining me right now is Alan Dershowitz, Harvard Law Professor Emeritus, former criminal defense attorney, and the author of the book, The Case Against Impeaching Trump. Alan, good to see you. Thanks so much for joining us. So that conversation with Rudy Giuliani yesterday, I asked him about John Brennan's claims that he's going to try to sue the Trump administration for revoking his security clearance, and Giuliani answered saying, well, if he sues, that would be great because I'd like to have him under oath. Your reaction?
He won't sue. Look, the best way to approach security clearance is non-politically. There should be a nonpartisan board established by the Defense Department and the State Department to determine which former employees can maintain their security clearance, which not. It shouldn't be used as a political weapon. But Brennan is the worst person to bring this lawsuit because he has said things that, had he said them when he was director of the CIA, would have resulted in his security being revoked. He's not going to bring a lawsuit because he doesn't want to be cross-examined. He has the weakest of the cases. If the president were to start firing Sally Yates and other people, they would have a much, much stronger case for selective use of the classification revocation mechanism. But one person having had his security revoked is a very, very hard case to win.
Yeah,
so I don't think he's going to bring that lawsuit.
Well, let's talk about Sally Yates for a moment, because yesterday on Sunday Morning Futures, John Ratcliffe, the congressman from Texas, who's going to be leading the questioning of Bruce Orr, the DOJ #4 DOJ official, in a week, right, on the 28th. He's going to be leading that questioning. He said what happens in the questioning of Bruce Orr will dictate whether or not we bring Sally Yates in, because Bruce Orr was reporting to Sally Yates, and people are just learning now that Bruce Orr was actually profiting from the dossier. His wife, Nellie Orr, worked for Fusion GPS, so she was getting paid to put together the dossier, which ultimately became the document that was used to wiretap Carter Page and get a FISA warrant.
Well, that's worth investigating, and it's worth finding the facts. And if there were a neutral, non-political board, they might very well conclude that one or the other of them violated the criteria for security clearance. But I don't think that if a president selectively revokes the security clearance only of his critics, that would pass muster under the First Amendment. So I do think that the president would be protected, the country would be protected better if we had a non-political approach to removing security clearance. You might even say that all security clearance should presumptively be removed as soon as a person leaves office, and then they have to selectively apply, show a need to have security clearance. That would make sense. But using the mechanism of revocation in a political way makes it sound like it's punishment for criticizing the president, and that doesn't satisfy the spirit of the First Amendment. I wrote that in the Boston Globe article 3 weeks ago, even before these firings had occurred, so I'm consistent in my position.
Yeah.
Can I talk a little bit about Rudy Giuliani,
though? Yeah, please, go
Rudy
ahead. Yeah.
May have used an inartful phrase when he said truth isn't truth, but he was absolutely right in the point he was making, and that is, say the president were to be asked the question, did you discuss Flynn with Comey? And he says no, and let's assume that's truthful for a moment. But Comey says yes. Or let's assume he's asked, did you know about the meeting in the Trump Towers? And he says no, and then Cohen says yes. So you have two statements. Now, they can't both be true, that's for sure. But we're human beings, and we're not sure we can determine what's true or not. The prosecutors may decide that the truth is with Cohen and Comey and not with the president. And that's why we defense lawyers call that a perjury trap. You never allow your client to answer a question truthfully if someone else will answer the question differently, and that person may be believed over the truthful answer. That's what Rudy was trying to say. Inartfully put, but the point of it was something every defense attorney would agree to.
You know, I feel like this story is beginning to resonate with the American people, but the left is still pushing back as if the FBI and the leadership there did nothing wrong. But it's pretty obvious when you see what has taken place at the top of the FBI and the DOJ. Let's just name a couple of people. Andrew McCabe, fired for misconduct, criminally referred. Jim Comey, fired and under investigation. Sally Yates, fired, possibly under investigation soon. Peter Strzok, fired and under investigation. Bruce Orr, demoted and under investigation. I mean, there's a reason where all these people have been fired and now are under investigation, Alan.
Sure. For me, this is such sweet revenge. You know, for 50 years, I've been complaining about the excesses of the FBI, starting with J. Edgar Hoover, and all of my conservative friends have been saying, oh, no, no, the FBI can do no wrong, and the liberals were saying, oh, no, no, the FBI can do no right. Now the shoe's on the other foot. And it's all the liberals who are saying, oh, the FBI is above reproach. Don't question the FBI. Don't question prosecutors.
Well, why should we question it when they've been talking about collusion and there's no evidence? Look, Alan, the president tweeted this morning. Exactly. He says this. The president, where's the collusion? They made up a phony crime called collusion, and then there was no collusion. They say that there was obstruction of a phony crime that never existed. If you fight back or say anything bad about the rigged witch hunt, they scream obstruction. Your take, Alan, on where we are right now in this.
Oh, he's 100% right about that. It cannot be obstruction of justice to exercise your First Amendment right to critique prosecutors. I have been doing that all of my professional life. When I defend clients, I constantly complain in court papers, in the media, about the excesses of prosecutors. Have I committed obstruction of justice? That's part of the American tradition. It's part of what John Adams did when he complained against the prosecution of the Boston Massacre Brits. It's so traditionally part of our system. The idea of trying to concoct a case of obstruction of justice for criticizing special prosecutors. Bill Clinton did it when it came to Ken Starr. I did it on behalf of Bill Clinton.
Right.
All of us did it when they were yelling, lock her up about Hillary Clinton. Every American, from the president on down, has the right and the obligation to criticize prosecutors when they engage in excessively zealous prosecution. That's the American way.
Where do you think this special counsel investigation goes? I mean, let's face it. There are new reports this morning that President Trump's former lawyer, Michael Cohen, is under investigation now for committing bank fraud on over $20 million worth of loans years ago. It also claims Cohen is under fire for violating campaign finance laws. And then you've got the Paul Manafort trial, where Paul Manafort is being, on the hot seat, and the trial, day 3 of the trial for bank fraud that happened 20 years ago. So far, the special counsel has come up with no evidence whatsoever that implicates the president and his current advisors in any collusion or obstruction. So where does this investigation go, Alan?
Well, I think Judge Ellis put it very well when he told the American public that the only reason they're going after Manafort, and I would add to that Cohen, is not because of their sins or alleged crimes, but because they can squeeze these people to either sing or compose against the president. Where I think it's going is into a report that will come out after the midterm elections. It will be a scathing report critical of the president, which will be turned over to Congress, and it depends on the outcome of the election. This has become so political when the administration of justice depends on how people vote in November of this coming year. But that's what's happened. It's become very political. That's why from day one, I suggested a nonpartisan expert commission to look into how Russia was trying to influence our election. They would have come out with a report already. It would have engaged in preventive steps to stop Russia from interfering with our elections, and we wouldn't be worried about what's going on behind closed doors that we don't know about, with leaks from grand jury and leaks from the prosecutors. Yeah, well, this has been not good for America. Well, we'll see a special investigation would have been much better. And we'll see if the special counsel looks at some of the wrongdoing on the other side. Alan, it's good to see you. Thanks so much for joining us. Likewise. Alan Dershowitz.